Dr. Elisa Hallerman. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Laura?
I'm good. We're in the same city, but we are still virtual. It's through the wonder of technology. We get to still
Exactly.
sit with each other today. I'm really happy you're here.
I'm really happy I'm here too and excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. And I'm going to start it off by asking you, what book, besides Soulbriety and Stash, do you
Yes,
think should be mandatory reading for everyone on the planet?
that's such a good question. The one book that keeps popping into my head, and I'm sure I'll think of 10 others when I leave, but
Yes.
Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and it is about his experience in the during the Holocaust and how it was essential to find meaning and purpose within yourself, regardless of the situations. Obviously, in the worst horrific atrocity that we could imagine, the difference between the humans that were able to find that within themselves as opposed to the others.
Mm.
And that is a book that I give to a lot of adolescents, a lot of young adults, because I think that it is so easy to get caught up in the external, making us happy and the shiny new toys and the instant gratification that we lose sight that all of the things that we need are within us. And it's about tapping into that inner work. And I think really understanding what that is. So
That's
that would be
great.
my choice.
Excellent. Tell me the author's name again.
Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl. Okay, good. If it is mandatory reading for everyone on the planet, that means I must read it. So
Oh,
thank you for that.
you're gonna love it. And it's
Yeah.
it's it's intense but short.
Okay. All right. Good. Wow. Thank you for that. I'm Laura Cathcart Robbins. This is the only one in the room, but I'm never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey. Or hey, Hun.
Hi, David. What should I call you?
You
David?
can
You can
call me
call.
David. Yeah,
Sweetie?
sure. Nobody.
All right.
They all work. In this
Yeah.
setting, I'll answer to all of that.
Yeah. So, yeah, to make things more confusing, Scott's Riverside name is David. And what I
Oh,
always call him is
yes, that's what
Scott.
I
Yes.
said.
Yeah.
So
It's
what's your
confusing.
name?
So it's confusing in the world. So
Yes.
David Scott Slaughter is my name. So
David
Yes.
anytime
Scott.
something like sort of that administrative comes up, it's always David.
Got it.
Anytime that my friends see that and they go, well, they say exactly what you say. What's the deal? What's your name?
Right.
And I say Scott, and then they look at me like that's preposterous. It says David.
Right.
So it's just my father was Harry David, and I've tried David a number of times, and it never sticks. So
You're a Scott.
Hun,
He's a
yeah, I'm,
Scott.
I'm usually Scotty to my friends, and
Mm-hmm.
Scotty. Now we're
Scott, and
elaborating. Well,
yeah,
as you
yeah.
Yes.
So
know, in the book, like I have this Elisa thing going
okay,
on.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I get
You
it. I
do.
get it.
You totally do.
it's a good
Um,
conversation. So
it is a good conversation, and we should definitely talk more about names later on. But um, before we actually get into this interview with Dr. Elisa Hallerman, I want to shout out Ben Leyland because, so, Hun, and this is what I'm thinking. Are you ready for
speaking of
this?
Ben, I've gotten permission to call him Benjamin.
Yes. Well, I've been calling him Ben. I think he likes Benjamin, but it's too
he
late for
he
me.
says it's both.
You take it and call him Benjamin, but I think we should do like on one of our breaks, we should do a Ben playlist
Uh
because it'd be Sino,
huh.
right?
Yep.
And then it'd be Apollo Ono, and then it'd be Cole
Cole.
Richmond,
Right.
and now Dr. Elisa Hallerman. So we could bundle them all together, and himself because we interviewed him as well.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we could have a Ben's picks
Ben's
break.
picks, and that's
Yeah.
what we should do. He'd
Love
love
it.
it.
Yes. So shout out to Ben for this connection. We really appreciate it. So let me tell you about our guest today. She is Dr. Elisa Hallerman, PhD. She is the CEO of the first ever recovery management agency, aka RMA. Most recently, Elisa published her prescriptive memoir, Soulbriety, Heal your trauma, overcome addiction, and reconnect with your soul on overcoming drug and alcohol addiction, PTSD, and chronic trauma. There are many other things in her bio that we're not going to get into right now, but they're peppered throughout this interview. So welcome again to the show. This is a really exciting conversation for me because I feel, especially, it's and you know this from reading other people's books and then meeting them, and then you feel especially close to them because your book, like so many in this genre, is vulnerable, it's personal, and then it's also very soulful. And I want to say spiritual, but that seems to have a different connotation to other people than it does to me. But there's connective tissue in there that's not visible to the naked eye. It's what's out there in the world, and I really enjoyed it. And we're going to talk a lot about it. But I wanted to start. This might have been a post of yours, actually. 20 years ago, you were lying on your sister's living room floor, thinking your life was over. Trauma and drugs had me gripped so tight, dying seemed like an option. So I just thought that was really profound. I want to hear about your life when that was going on. You start us off in Soulbriety with you going to your drug dealers. And I mean, that's actually not the beginning because there's a foreword by Jamie Lee Curtis, which is brilliant. But then when you start writing, you take us to your drug dealers. And can you just tell us about that night? Because you wrote about it so viscerally. I was really invested in whatever the outcome was by the end of the scene.
The scene where after I go to the drug dealer, or the scene when I'm at my sister's?
No, the scene where you're at the drug dealer. Take us through that night first.
Yeah, so this was at the tail end of my using. So I'd say I was drinking in college and in law school, but I think my addiction to drugs and alcohol, certainly cocaine, really came a little bit later in my mid-20s. And I had about an 8-year run of that. So this is pretty much in that 7th, 8th year where it was no longer champagne and cocaine and friends and partying, and it was alone and isolating and binging. So a routine of mine would be to go on Friday after work to Benny's house and get my drugs. And I talk about how, and I don't want this is a big trigger warning, this scene. So if you want to skip this part, please, know that it's a little bit graphic. But I would call him and I would head over and I would take a taxi and I would have the taxi wait and I would go inside and I would hand him the money, and you could either buy grams or what we would call an 8-ball, which is a little extra, like a baker's dozen of cocaine, right? If you will. But that felt too much in one baggie. So I would pay the extra just to get them all in separate baggies. So I was only doing one baggie at a time. And it's these little things that we do, right, with ourselves, these little commitments that we make so it's not so bad. And I knew intuitively that the situation that I was in was bad, was wrong. But I needed, at that point in my addiction, I needed that drug like I needed air and water. And once I was in that lizard brain, once I was in that part of my brain where I was fully immersed in the addiction, I would stop at nothing. So here I am in this dirty little studio with this, man who in my memory was 104, and there was grime and stuff everywhere. And, this once nice girl from Long Island who was a cheerleader and grew up in a very upper class, middle class family was, doing lines off his kitchen table, and it was
Mm-hmm.
disgusting. And there was nothing I could do about it. And then I left with my drugs and I went to a hotel and I hunkered down for the next 3 days with my drugs and copious amounts of alcohol in a room, going in and out of psychosis and worrying that, quote unquote, they or them
Mm-hmm.
were coming to get me, piling furniture up against the door, looking out the peephole, coming back down, calling downstairs to the front desk and changing my name to some sort of alias. And finally, at the end of the binge, taking whatever I needed to be able to fall asleep and thinking to myself, well, I hope I wake up. And if I don't, I hope they find me, because now I've
Mm.
changed my name 42 times. And just being so scared and so alone, and at the same time that you're pushing everyone that you love away and hiding everything in secrecy, also a big part of you is hoping for someone to come and rescue you.
Yes. Yeah. And you say that um, almost verbatim, that you wish someone would, but at the same time you're not allowing it.
Correct.
What was going on in your life outside of that at that time? What did your life look like outside of those weekends where you would get loaded?
Well, from what I remember, not much else, but I was working. I was a very newly promoted young agent, not a lot of responsibility, and flailing big time and holding on by a thread, and was told that I was probably going to be let go if I couldn't get my stuff together. And they had offered help. I'd pushed everyone away. And I think my life was really, really small at that point, other than going to work when I could, coming home and being isolated in my room. It was a lot of using and then recovering. So,
Mm-hmm.
doing everything I could to feel better during those next few days, sleeping as much as I could, doing whatever I could, eating for the first time. And I was living with my roommate, Jill, at the time, who I just love so much to this day. And she really didn't have any idea. I really even kept it from her. Um, she had no idea that I was suffering to the extent that I was. And I really did a very good job of keeping that secret for the
Yeah.
most
Yeah,
part,
you did.
except for
Yeah.
the people that were and are sober. They kind of had an idea of like,
They
oh,
clocked you.
yeah,
Yeah.
they totally, totally did.
Um, yeah, I mean, I just think the way you wrote that, the nothing is ever enough of it all, like, because, obviously I'm in recovery. I dealt with a different type of addiction, but a drug addiction, a pill addiction. And so I understand it. But even as I'm reading yours, it's like I don't know anything about addiction. It's like, I'm rooting for you to just get help faster, right, in
Hmm.
that scene. And I know that you're doing the only thing that you can do, which is
Right,
more,
right.
because it feels like survival. It's that reptilian brain, like you said. Um, and yeah, and you just wrote that really well. And the paranoia of it all, that psychotic or psychosis state of mind that you
Yep.
describe, that is, I mean, it's horrifying, and the things that people can do to themselves while they're in that state is
Yes.
horrifying.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that, during that time, I had no idea that I was a drug addict or an alcoholic. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought there was something really, really wrong with me that nobody else had. I knew other people drank and used drugs, of course, but I thought mine was very uniquely different. And I had no idea what was wrong with me. So I was in this perpetual cycle of using and recovery, too ashamed to share about it because it was
Mm-hmm.
so dark. Thought I was losing my mind because of the in and out of psychosis and paranoia. And it's just a really scary place to be. And I was very relieved to find out that when I went to my first meeting after that incident at my sister's, that I did have the disease of alcoholism and that I was a drug addict. But it wasn't until years later when I went back to school that I really started to understand the neuroscience of it and the way that trauma gets held on in our bodies and what it does to our brain and the way that our brain works when we are crossed over into that line of addiction. And that's really what I wanted to share, the extent of it, but also share the why so that more people
Yes.
could feel
Mm-hmm.
educated in what was going on for them, because that I think was the scariest part for me. And you on that bathroom floor in your book, I felt the same way. I was like, oh, like I just, right? It's that's the
Mm-hmm.
connection of recovery, is that regardless of our stories, that pain in that moment connected so viscerally to me. I was like, I know that. I know that
Yeah.
pain.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's only with perspective that we can really write about that
Of
pain,
course.
um, which you have. And so I want to move forward a little bit. You went to law school before you became an agent.
Correct.
Before
I
you,
went to law
yeah.
school right after college.
Okay. So you were planning to be an attorney.
I was an attorney. I practiced in New York for about a year and a half, 2 years
Mm-hmm.
before I moved to Los Angeles and started working in the entertainment business.
Right. Okay. And did you love it?
I hated it.
The You hated it. I knew the answer to that, but I just wanted to hear you say
Did
it.
you love
You
it? No.
yeah.
I Listen, the law on television is so much more glamorous than in real life. So I was working
Mm,
for a small firm. I was able to go to court, litigate, but that looks like you carrying a bunch of files, red wells we would call them, schlepping around the five boroughs of Manhattan on the subway in whatever weather it is, going into a kind of dingy courtroom and running to the next thing.
right.
And it wasn't lighting me up. It wasn't
No.
not lighting me up.
No. So you move to LA, you go to you go into the entertainment business, you become an agent, which is a talent agent, not a real estate agent, but a
Yeah.
talent agent.
Yeah.
Um, and then so going back or going forward rather, your 5-year soberversary,
Yeah.
right? So you have now gone from hanging on by a string, right, to being someone who has kind of the dream situation,
Right.
the dream bank account, the dream house, um, what could be a dream job, right?
Yep.
You have status, you have power, you have prestige. You talked about trading one addiction for another, which people always ask about. So I'm so glad that you talk about that in your book. But tell me what your life looked like on that moment or that day that you woke up on your 5-year soberversary, and why you were sad, why you had this sense of despair.
For me, and I think for most people, when you get sober, I had no intention of staying sober. I just was like, I need a minute. I showed up with like, I need a minute. Like, let me try this out. And and one day turns into a week, turns into 2 weeks. You have 30 days. You go for 60, and that's where my sort of like wanting to win came in of like, oh, I'm going to just keep doing this. Eventually, my life started getting easier. And so that was what it was going to be. But for me, even though I diligently done a 12-step program and was in therapy, I really didn't know who I was. And I really didn't have a sense of self. And I definitely hadn't done my trauma work. And we can talk about that after. But, for me, it was things that had happened in my childhood. And then it was the loss of one of my best friends to suicide in my 20s. And never getting help for that and suffering from extreme PTSD and all the symptomology that came along with that, and trying to and thinking, okay, I got sober, I'm abstinent, and so now I should be fine. And that's just not how sobriety works. So here I was at 5 years with all this outside stuff and this quote unquote success, and I didn't feel good on the inside. And that was a scary place to be. And then for me, I went back and started remembering all those other women that shared about their relapses and those moments when they just go out. And I felt like I was on that verge. I desperately didn't want to use again, but I also felt like, what am I doing? And
Right. What's the point,
what's
right?
the point?
Yeah.
And I also had this really, I call them soul whispers, this really loud whisper going, is this what you want to do? And like, how are you getting out of this? Like, how do you give back your movie star clients? Like, what, you're in these golden handcuffs and you've created this amazing career for yourself and you feel stuck.
Mm. Yeah. And you and I talked briefly about your friend that passed away, that who was also an agent, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And you said that the thing you felt like that obviously was traumatic, and you just talked about that,
Mm-hmm.
but you said bigger than that, you felt alone.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was the end result of this big trauma from the loss of him. Um what was the catalyst? Was that the catalyst for you to kind of start moving toward finding real recovery? Because yeah, go ahead, tell me.
No. So when I first moved out to Los Angeles in my mid 20s with my sister, I started working as an assistant to an agent. And my sister left after about a year, went back to New York, and here I was 3,000 miles away from my closest friends that I'd grown up with and my family, and my parents were dealing with a lot of their own trauma and addiction and so on during that time. So I was pretty far removed, and the people in LA became my makeshift family. And he was one of those people. He was like a brother to me. He was a few years older. He was from New York, and we had a lot in common, and we had a lot of mutual friends, and he just mentored me and watched out for me, and I felt very safe. So when he died, with any death, of course, there is an enormous grieving period. With suicide, is an extra layer of emotions that don't seem to belong with grief, which is anger and fear and resentment, and it's terrifying in a way. And so after that had happened, I was not functioning whatsoever. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't show up. I couldn't stop crying. I was having massive panic attacks. was agoraphobic. Like, it was so bad. And I didn't have the tools or the help. And no one was, and I talk about like the hero of who's coming to save you, and no one was coming to save me. And and so I just started doing things that, eventually would get me through. But that was the catalyst that that drove me to have the drugs and the alcohol use escalate, because I
Right.
was suffering so much.
Sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, I completely understand that. And I mean, in a way, that could be the catalyst for your recovery because it escalated your drug and alcohol use, which
Yeah.
eventually brought you in.
Yeah.
But you eventually you leave. I don't know if you leave being an agent to go study. Um, what do you go study? I have
So,
in my notes you study recovery, but is that right?
so what happened was, here I am, I'm still agenting. I have this big job. I'm working for Ari, and I'm a partner, and I decide, I go on this vacation, and I'm like meditating and reading everything, and something I read said, make a list of all the things that you ever wanted to do. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't worry, no one's reading it. What do you want to do? What do you want to do when you were little? What's interesting to you? I don't have the list anymore, but the three things that I remember are that I said: I wanted to learn more about addiction, I wanted to help other women, and I wanted to be an ER doctor. And I thought, okay, I'm going to come home and I'm going to look at what tiny little action I could take towards each one of these. Just if there's one little thing I could do. So as I'm Googling the prerequisites to go to medical school, to take the MCATs, right? Because it's just an exercise. I remember, oh, you're terrible at math. This is why you went to law school. This isn't going to work. But while I was on the UCLA website, I found these addiction counseling classes. And I thought, let's do that. So I started taking classes at night on addiction medicine and learning about counseling. And I did that every Tuesday and Thursday night while I was agenting. And so I would study in my staff meetings with my little index cards for my quizzes and my tests. But it was lighting me up again, just the education and learning. And I was just blown away. And I thought, if I've been sober now X amount of years, and I was very open about my sobriety in the community, helped a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues, a lot of my family members, that if I didn't know a lot of this, I didn't think a lot of people had the information. You don't know what you don't know. And with addiction medicine and neuroscience, it's so, every day you're learning something new. Every day there's a new study. Every day there's something else. So I decided during that sort of year and a half of being in school that, okay, I wanted to do something in this area, but I didn't know what that looked like. So I then decided to open up a sober living or a transitional living, which had 9 beds for young male adults. And so I started that. And so here I am, like, I have this education and counseling. Now I open this house. I'm still agenting. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, when am I going to be able to leave? And then there was just that one day, and I think it was my birthday, that I just sort of walked into Ari's office and Patrick's office, and I was like, I'm going to retire. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And they were like, okay, but, jump, typical, right? Mansplaining. What are we going to do? We're going to get you a job. You're going to be a producer. You're going to, we're going to, and I was like, no. I'm going to go do this. And they were like, we don't understand. And I was like, yeah, I can't explain it, but this is what I want to do. And, and when I left the entertainment business, it was newsworthy in our little circle for a minute. And I started getting a lot of phone calls from people that needed help. And so that's what started that. And then once I had left the entertainment business, I realized I needed much more of an education to be at the level that I wanted to be and really build this business that I wanted to build. And so I went back to school and got my master's and doctorate in psychology, focusing on trauma and neuroscience.
I mean, just from that story, you should be 102 years old. Because
I
that's a
feel, Laura,
lot.
today I feel like I'm 150. I swear to God. I'm exhausted.
But okay, I don't know everything that goes into opening a sober living or a transitional living, but I know it's a lot. I
Yes.
know it's no easy feat, and you were doing it while you were taking classes and working a full-time job that apparently you were great at. Um, that's amazing. I mean, that's what's really cool about that, Elisa, is one, it shows you how much energy you must have been putting into your addiction,
Mm,
right? Like all the strategy and whatever, and just kind of,
exactly.
keeping your body propped up basically so that you could get through the week and then go again. And now you're pouring all that energy into these other things. I mean, that's a lot of energy. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, there was short overlap, right, between them, but I was very careful not to make. I run impulsive, like that's just one of my character defects. So I was really careful. These were big, big decisions to do one thing, do both, slowly start to feel like I remember talking to my friend Marianne Williamson at that time, and I said to her, "How do I know when I'm supposed to leave?" You know, WME, Endeavor, whatever it was at the time. How do I know? And so she said, "You'll know when you know. You'll just know." And I was like, "Come on, give me more." She was like, "Wanting to know the future is ego. You will know intuitively in your body when it is time." And
Mm.
that's what happened. That one day I walked in and I looked around and I was like, I literally don't work here anymore. I work down there at that brick and mortar sober living in Santa Monica. And then once I had started that, when I decided to go back and get my master's and doctorate and the business started to build itself, I was like, this is too much. I need to close the sober living. So I only had it for 2 years. And then it was about putting all my energy into, graduate school again and building a real business.
Wow. Wow. Um, Soulbriety, I read in your book, among other things, is a soul-centered path of recovery from addiction through healing its underlying origin, trauma.
Yes.
Um, you talk about trauma a lot in the book, and you talk about it in a different way. Trauma is one of those words that I don't hear anymore. Um, because I feel like it's overused, and I feel like maybe it
Mm-hmm.
covers too much, or it just doesn't have the same impact to me that it
Mm-hmm.
did the first few times I really understood what it meant. But you talk about it in like I said, in a different way, and I'm just gonna read this because you say, I'm paraphrasing you, that relapse is a result of trauma, and then you define trauma as any experience that takes us out of the window of our tolerance, when something happens that is unknown or overwhelming, our brains can't make sense of it, which means that we've all experienced trauma.
In some
And
capacity or another.
yeah, yes.
We do all experience trauma, but some of us have more resilience than others. So trauma is subjective. Yes, traumatic things happen all the time. It's about, and when we talk about trauma healing, it's not to say that we all haven't experienced trauma, because of course we have, and we're just living in the world and watching the news, which in itself is
It's
traumatic.
traumatic, yeah.
So that goes without saying. But Dr. Dan Siegel talks about the window of tolerance. If you imagine that during your day you have these moments of regulation where all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, like I have to do this thing, or I just got this call and and you're very heightened. And then in an hour or so, you're relaxed, or you go for a walk and you're relaxed. So our bodies are meant to self-regulate. So we have these up and down moments throughout the day. What some people's window of tolerance, though, is very narrow because they've already had some severe childhood trauma, some chronic trauma that's been going on, or some complex PTSD that has happened that they have not healed. So their window of tolerance is narrower, which means that something could happen that might, you go home and your boyfriend says, I thought you were going to bring home dinner, which is annoying because you just worked 12 hours. And maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, that would normally be a 2, where you'd be like, dude, you do da 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 da. But because someone doesn't have the resilience, or that triggers another moment, that feels like a 12. And so the reaction is, overcompensating.
Outsized. Yeah.
Yeah, but trauma is subjective. There was a very large study done in after a huge car accident, one of the largest car accidents, multiple cars in Canada. And they really studied the different participants that had been in it and what their experience is. So this husband and wife were in the same car, experienced the same accident, saw the same horrendous things in front of them. And the husband was able to, in a week or so, kind of recover. And it was devastating in many ways. And there was a lot of recovery and healing, while the wife was living in the experience as if it was still happening. So it's not about the event, it's about how that event is affecting us in the present moment. That's when someone's suffering from trauma.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and you really explain that really well in your book, and it's I think it's an important way to look at it, because I think I'm not alone in thinking that it's overused, or I don't even know if it's a conscious thought. I don't think it's overused. I just, like I said, I just don't hear it. It doesn't impact me in the same way. But when I read what you wrote about it, it did. And then I was able to relate it to my own experiences and the experiences of the people around me, especially people that have had the same experience and react in different ways.
Yep.
And my reaction is often different. So I was wondering, because I wanted to talk about Billy, because I love the arc of his story. Do you ever feel, and I want you to tell us about him, but do you ever feel like you're in a race with addiction? Like, you meet somebody and then getting them to see and acknowledge and heal from the trauma before the addiction gets them. Does it ever feel like that to you?
Every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every day. It's just because it's so right here, because I'm dealing with it all day long. And then I come and I take an hour to do a podcast, but then I'm going right back into that. So just taking a breath for all those that I worked with today. But yes, it is a real race of time, because one, I know how much they're suffering and I want to get them out of it as quickly as I can, because I know what's on the other side of abstinence and sobriety and recovery. And two, because the bottom of addiction these days is often fatal. Not in a way that it was 20 years ago when I was using. And with the fentanyl crisis, and it is, there's just not a lot of second chances in a way that there used to be. And so it is a race against time, and also this desperation of wanting to help people. But at the same time, my job to not be emotional about it and to be able to take these tiny pauses to do it right, or as right as we can in the moment, in order to get them the best result that they need. And also allow them to have autonomy in the decision making, because I can't do the work for them. So there's very much what comes first, the trauma or the addiction, and what are we treating first? And it's everything all at once at the same time is the answer. It's not we're going to do this and then we're going to do that. You know, this hour I'm doing this and the next hour I'm doing that. It's all of it at the same time. And it's complicated and complex for sure, because we're dealing with humans.
Yes. And and I love that, the everything all at once, because it doesn't make sense probably to people, right? But it has to be because of that ticking clock too.
Yep.
You have to go in, and you can't solve one without solving the other. It won't make sense. So doing them both at the same, or all of it, like you said, at the same time. I want to be mindful of your time, because I know that you are going to help somebody after we finish. Billy, you know, when your mom was with you, staying with you because she was recovering. She was recovering, right, from surgery?
She was recovering from surgery, correct.
Yeah, and you left the house after getting a phone call at 11:30 at night because you got a call about Billy.
Right.
What was going on with him?
Billy had relapsed, and I knew he was probably using a combination of meth and or heroin, which was drugs of choice, really meth at the time. And I knew that he would also be, that he would easily get psychotic and that put himself in danger. And I had known him for a couple of years and had been working with him and his family. And so, when I'm working with someone for a while and they have these periods of sobriety, right, you really get to see the authentic soul self. You get to have those conversations and know how badly that they want it, and know how much they're trying, and also know that there's a lot of unresolved trauma, or what lies underneath the surface. And so I knew all of that, and I just felt very called that night, knowing his history as well as I did, and knowing that he had suicidal ideation in the past. And for me, that is obviously a trigger of mine, which I try to go in a positive way, because it is something that hits me in a way that takes me to my knees every time. But at the same time, I'm on a mission to just the best I can not have that happen. And so I decide that me and my team are going to leave and go get him before it escalates. And we do. And we wait outside, and we're waiting for him, and he eventually pulls up, and it's the middle of the night. And as I go to greet him, and I'm assuming you want me to do the spoiler alert of what happens.
Yes.
As I go to greet him, and he gets out of the car, he's dressed as a female. And I just had so much love in my heart. And also it was this immediate for me of like, oh, okay, like now we can do another layer. Like here, this, I was like, this is so positive. And of course, he was filled with shame at that moment and looked at me and, and said, I can't believe you're seeing me like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, And I said, why? I already know that you were using. And he said, no, not that. And
Hmm.
I said, yeah, we're really going to have to do something about that shirt. It is atrocious. And we're going to have to go shopping.
Yes.
And, and he still speaks about that and that moment. And obviously, all the stories in the book are a combination of different clients. So that
Hmm.
isn't one person. Those are different experiences. But that sentence, that one moment,
That was him.
that was right, that slight humor with that authentic, like, this isn't, because as addicts, we have so much secrets. When there's that saying, like, you're only as sick as your secrets, and it's because of the shame. It's not the secrecy, it's the shame that we carry because of our secrets. And
Right.
whatever those things are, and just the minute we allow light to shine on that dark, the darkness can no longer exist. And so, yeah, that was a big moment.
That's a big
And
moment.
it was a big moment.
Yeah. I love that. I love his whole story. And, for all of you listening, you must read the book so you can read more of those stories in there. And there is an arc. And we see Billy again later in the book as well. But you also, when you leave your mom to go out there with your team, you tell her you're going out to slay dragons, which I loved.
Mm.
Um, that's what you say, right? To slay
Yeah,
dragons? Yeah.
it was, it was, this was during, like, I think this period was really, also, like, there was a lot of Game of Thrones going on at the time. That was also like what was going on in pop culture. But, there's also sort of, I studied a lot of mythology and as a depth psychologist and so on and so forth. And so for me, it really signified something. And I talk a lot in the
Hmm.
book about mythology and imagery and so on. But yeah, that's what we used to say. We'd be like, let's go slay dragons, let's go save lives. And
Yes.
that's just how we do it. And when I left the house today, my housekeeper, who's been with me for 20 years, she was like, she knows when I say it. She's like,
Yeah.
bless you, and go
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 do
go
good
do it.
work.
Go do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, in these last couple minutes, tell us about Recovery Management Agency and why it's different than anything else out there.
So I really wanted to create a place, you know, as a former lawyer and as a former agent, I had this job where people would come to me when they needed legal advice or when they needed career advice. And I felt like that was the missing piece in, certainly in the beginning, in the addiction community, where if you were suffering, who was that expert? Was it just your therapist? Was it a doctor? We tend to ask our neighbors and our friends, and who did who did you see? Where did you go to therapy? What kind of recovery did you do? And, like, we do that, and we're Googling, and there's such a wealth of information. But I thought, well, what if you have your own manager? What if you have your own agent of recovery? And what if I just focused on helping people get well and heal? And that was my only job. And so so I took the blueprint of how I ran the talent department and said, let's build that out. Let's have agents and managers that are here to just do that. And so we work with families and individuals and companies and schools. And what we do is a lot of crisis management, if we need to in the beginning, of getting them into the hospital or into a safe area or dealing with suicidal ideation or psychosis or what have you. But then we take a pause and we really do these full assessment and discovery where we're looking at a 360 of who this person really is, not just the symptoms, but the strengths and all the positive things, and a way in. And then really looking at what might lie underneath, where have the ruptures been. Soulbriety is a lifestyle of growing down, but it's also a methodology about creating meaning from our life experiences, good or bad, that it is about enriching our perspective in the way we see things. And so, with that as the sort of cornerstone of RMA, that is how I look at everything through the lens of soulbriety. Of course, I can't work on that day one, but that is the lens which we work through. We're really looking at treating that person from a real integrative medical perspective.
I love that. I love that. And I love that it came from your experience in those two careers of yours. Is it brick and mortar or
No,
virtual?
virtual.
Okay. So it's
Virtual.
accessible to basically anyone.
Anyone. We have clients all over the world, and we're really, our only clients are the people that we're working with. So we're not aligned with any therapist or doctor or treatment center or anything. And we expanded over the years from just substance abuse and behavioral addictions to pure psychiatric and mental illness, whatever that might be, as well as trauma, PTSD, and so on.
Fantastic. I think I read this, that you are now repped by the agency as an author that
Yes.
you worked for, which is so cool.
Yes,
What a great
I am.
full circle moment.
Yeah, really, it really is. I mean, I really wanted this one particular woman, Margaret Riley King, to be my agent. And I don't know if, I think I would have called her no matter where she was. She happens to be at WME. And, and I sent her, I emailed her cold, and I didn't know her, and we didn't really work there at the same time. So it was separate, but yes, it's all the same now.
It's very cool.
It
It's
is
very
cool.
The memoir is called Soulbriety, Heal Your Trauma, Overcome Addiction, and Reconnect with Your Soul by Dr. Elisa Hallerman, who has, this is a storytelling podcast. We invite people on to come and share their stories. Your story's beautiful.
Thank you.
And I love where you are now. It's certainly not the end, but I love where you are in the story now and what you're doing with what you've been given and what you found, and that your mission is to help people and to discover what I'm assuming you're still discovering for yourself too, that you're continuing to evolve.
Always.
Yeah. Tell us where people can find you.
People can find me on my website, which is drhallerman.com, and that's D as in David, R Hallerman, HALLERMAN.com, or follow me on Instagram, which is Dr. Elisa Hallerman. And yeah, pretty simple.
Very simple. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elisa Hallerman, and I am the only one who wrote the book on Soulbriety.